I never meant to notice her, not like that. She was just my student's roommate, until one night she became the only thing I couldn't stop thinking about. Where are you watching from? And tell me what this story feels like to you. Backhand index pointing down. It started on one of those evenings that weren't supposed to mean anything. The kind where the world feels smaller, the city outside half asleep, rain hanging in the air, and my desk buried beneath unfinished papers. I remember the sound of the clock, steady, judgmental, reminding me how long I'd been alone with my thoughts. Then came the knock on the door. It was Daniel, one of my better students. Polite, earnest, always slightly nervous around me. He said he was dropping off a borrowed book. I told him to come in, already half distracted by the notes in front of me. I didn't notice the other footsteps until she spoke. Her voice didn't belong in that room. It carried a kind of brightness that felt out of place among the quiet and dust of my study. Sorry, I hope we're not interrupting. I just wanted to see the place you talk about all the time. When I looked up, she was standing near the door, half hidden behind Daniel, a girl with rain-speckled hair, her jacket clinging slightly to her shoulders. She couldn't have been more than 24. But there was something about the way she held herself, curious, unafraid, observant. She wasn't supposed to be memorable. Yet somehow, everything about her stayed in the room after she left. Daniel chatted, unaware of the shift in the air. She wandered, fingers brushing the spines of old books, tracing titles she didn't recognize. Her curiosity wasn't polite, it was alive, genuine. When her eyes met mine, there was no hesitation, no discomfort. Just quiet study, as if she wanted to see the person behind the voice her roommate spoke about. You keep your books like people, the quiet ones at the back, she said with a small laugh. I didn't reply right away. I was too busy wondering how she noticed something so small, so true. That's how it began. No grand moment. No instant spark. Just the kind of encounter that lingers in the back of your mind when you think you've forgotten it. When they left, the apartment returned to silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. The air felt slightly warmer. The scent of her rain-wet hair still lingered faintly, mixing with the old paper and coffee. I remember standing there, hand resting on the edge of my desk, trying to shake off the thought that maybe, just maybe, I'd let something unfamiliar slip through the door tonight. Something I wasn't ready to name. She was just my student's roommate, I told myself. But part of me already knew that wasn't true. It began as coincidence. Or so I kept telling myself. The first time, I saw her at the cafe across from campus, the quiet one tucked between the bookstore and the flower shop. She was sitting by the window, sketchbook open, sunlight catching the edges of her hair. When she looked up and spotted me, she smiled like we were already old friends. Professor Hale, she called out, waving. You drink the same thing every time, don't you? I remember feeling oddly caught, not in guilt, but in surprise. Students didn't usually speak to me like that. They were polite, restrained, almost rehearsed. But she had none of that hesitation. She spoke as if she'd known me long before that night in my apartment. I tried to keep my tone light. Routine keeps the world from collapsing, I said, half smiling. What keeps you from living? She replied, not missing a beat. There was something disarming about her, the way she could turn a simple exchange into something quietly intimate. Over the next few weeks, I saw her again. And again. At the library, at the park, sometimes at the same cafe, always with that same unassuming presence. She'd wave, sit across from me, and ask questions that had nothing to do with academics. Do you ever get tired of being the one who knows everything? What did you dream of doing before you started teaching? Questions no one had asked me in years. She'd listen to my answers, not with politeness, but with an intensity that made me self-conscious. Like she was reading between my words. And every time, I'd find myself noticing more, the way her eyes flickered with thought when she sketched, the small crease that appeared near her mouth when she was trying not to smile, the faint scent of paint and paper that followed her. It was subtle, but something inside me started to shift. She wasn't trying to impress me, wasn't chasing anything. She was just there, curious, unfiltered, alive in a way I hadn't been for a long time. I told myself it was harmless. Just conversation. Just a student's roommate who happened to be different. But soon, I began catching myself looking for her before she arrived. My eyes drifting toward the door whenever the cafe bell rang. My heart doing that quiet, traitorous thing, beating faster for no reason. "You're easy to find," she said once, laughing. "You always sit near the window, like you're waiting for someone." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because maybe I was. The thought lingered long after she left that day, her coffee half finished, her laughter still echoing faintly in my mind. I looked down at the empty chair across from me, at the napkin she doodled on and left behind. A small sketch, 2 cups of coffee, side by side, untouched. It shouldn't have meant anything. But somehow it did. And for the first time in years, I realized how dangerous it was to feel something that simple. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind that felt like it could last forever. Sunlight spilled through the blinds in slow stripes across my desk, warm and golden, catching the dust in midair. I'd been grading essays for hours when a soft knock broke the silence. When I looked up, she was standing in the doorway again, holding 2 books against her chest. "Daniel said you might have more poetry I could borrow," she said, smiling carefully, as if testing my reaction. I nodded, motioning her in. My office wasn't made for company. Too many books, too little space, and nowhere to hide from the weight of another person's presence. She moved slowly between the shelves, her fingertips brushing across spines like she was reading their stories through touch alone. I watched her, longer than I should have. There was a calmness in her movements, but also something restless beneath the surface. She had that kind of energy that made the air feel charged, like static before a storm. "You always keep the lights this low?" she asked, turning toward me with that half-smile that didn't need an answer. "Helps me think," I said. "Or helps you hide?" she teased softly. It was disarming, how easily she could cut through me with a single question. I laughed it off, but her eyes stayed on me, searching, curious. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense. It was something deeper, a kind of emotional intimacy that made every word feel personal. She pulled a book from the shelf, Rilke, and read aloud a few lines under her breath, the words trembling slightly in her voice. "Love consists in this, that 2 solitudes protect and touch and greet each other." The room felt smaller after that. The sunlight dimmed, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of pages turning and her quiet breathing beside me. She was standing close now, close enough for me to see the faint paint smudge on her wrist, the small freckle beneath her jaw. I wanted to look away, to step back, to draw that invisible line again. But I didn't. "You read like someone who's been lonely for too long," she said, almost whispering. It wasn't accusation. It was empathy, dangerous, gentle empathy. I cleared my throat, tried to steady my voice. "You shouldn't say things like that," I said quietly. "Why not?" Her question hung there, soft, fearless. And in that silence, something inside me cracked open, not desire, not yet, but the undeniable awareness that I was standing on the edge of something I could neither name nor control. She left a few minutes later, carrying her borrowed books, leaving behind only the faintest scent of her perfume and a small ripple in the air, the kind that lingers long after a door closes. When I sat back down, I realized my hands were trembling slightly. I stared at the sunlight on the floor, now shifting toward dusk, and whispered to no one in particular. "You cross nothing, and yet everything." I wasn't supposed to be there that night. She'd invited me a week before, to her first art exhibit. I told her I'd try to stop by, knowing full well I shouldn't. Professors didn't attend student events like that. Not when the artist in question made it hard to think straight. But as evening fell and rain began to streak the city windows, I found myself walking toward the gallery anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was loneliness. Or maybe it was her, the way she had started to live in my thoughts like a quiet song I couldn't turn off. The space was small, softly lit, filled with people murmuring over canvases and wine glasses. The scent of paint and wet pavement clung to the air. I saw her before she saw me, standing by one of her paintings, hair pinned loosely, a trace of nervous energy in her smile. She looked different that night, not the playful girl from the cafe, but a woman standing inside her own creation. When our eyes met across the room, her lips parted slightly, surprise first, then something gentler. She excused herself from the group and walked over. "You came," she said, her voice softer than the rain outside. "I didn't plan to," I admitted. "But I couldn't stay away." She laughed under her breath, though her eyes said something else. "Then I'm glad you didn't." She led me toward one of the larger canvases. Muted colors, deep shadows, a single figure standing alone under a streetlight. It was unmistakably me, or rather, the version of me she'd seen. My posture, my solitude, my silence. "You painted this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I tried to paint what loneliness feels like," she said. Then, after a pause, "and what I saw in you." The words hit harder than they should have. For a moment, the noise of the gallery faded. All that existed was her voice, her nearness, and the faint reflection of both of us in the varnished surface of the painting. "Did I go too far?" she asked, eyes searching mine. I should have said yes. I should have drawn that invisible line again, the one I'd been pretending still existed. But I didn't. "No," I said quietly. "You saw too much, maybe. But not too far." We stood there in silence, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, yet far enough that neither of us could mistake what this was. Something unspoken. Something dangerous. Something alive. When she reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, her hand trembled slightly. And I realized she was just as caught in it as I was. Later, as I walked home in the rain, I could still feel the echo of her gaze, soft, uncertain, unguarded. The city lights blurred against the glass of my umbrella, and I whispered to myself, "That's when it happened. That's when I stopped pretending I could forget her." After the exhibit, everything changed, not all at once, but in quiet, invisible ways. The kind of changes you don't notice until the damage is already done. At first, things continued as before. A shared coffee now and then. A message about a book or a quote she'd found. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. We'd crossed into that dangerous space where silence meant more than words, where every small moment felt like confession. And then came the whispers. It started in the hallways, the faint hum of speculation that travels faster than truth. A colleague mentioned seeing me at the exhibit. A student asked if I knew the artist from Daniel's apartment. The way they said it, light, harmless, still felt like a warning. I remember the look on her face when I told her. "They're starting to talk," I said quietly, standing under the old oak outside the library. She looked at me with something between fear and defiance. "Let them," she said. "We haven't done anything wrong." She was right, and yet that didn't matter. In academia, perception is reality. And suddenly, the walls I'd built to keep her at a distance began to feel like the only thing holding my life together. So, I did what I always do when things become too real. I pulled away. Text unanswered. Coffee cups left cold. Her sketches, once left on my desk as small acts of warmth, stopped appearing. Days became weeks. My lectures went on as usual. I spoke of literature, of restraint, of the human heart's contradictions, all while living one of my own. But inside, every word felt like a lie. One afternoon, I saw her across campus. She was with friends, laughing, sunlight flickering through her hair. And yet, even from a distance, I could tell, the laughter didn't reach her eyes. "You don't get to vanish when things get difficult," she said to me days later when I finally answered her call. "I'm not vanishing," I lied. "I'm protecting you." "No," she said quietly. "You're protecting yourself." Her voice didn't tremble. But mine did. There's a special kind of pain that comes with doing the right thing for the wrong reason. I told myself that stepping back was noble, that she deserved someone without a shadow over his name. But at night, when the world went still, I'd hear echoes of her voice in the back of my mind, those words I never let her finish. I'd pass the cafe and see someone sitting at our table, her laughter replaced by strangers' voices. And every time, I'd think of that painting, the man under the streetlight, still standing alone. In saving her from scandal, I'd condemned myself to silence. And yet, the silence wasn't empty. It carried her name. Distance, I whispered once, staring at my reflection in the dark window, isn't protection. It's punishment. I found her letter on a morning like any other, soft light creeping through the blinds, the smell of stale coffee still in the air, papers scattered across my desk. It was tucked beneath a stack of essays, folded neatly, my name written in her handwriting, looping, patient, familiar. For a moment, I just stared at it. Letters are dangerous things. They never arrive when you're ready. They wait, silent, weightless, until you pick them up, and suddenly, they carry the heaviness of everything you refuse to say aloud. I opened it slowly. The paper trembled in my hands. You don't have to reply, she began. I just need to say this before I disappear from your world for good. Her words were steady. No anger, no blame, just the quiet ache of someone who had waited too long for an answer that never came. You taught me how to see the beauty in restraint, she wrote. But somewhere along the way, I realized you were using restraint to keep yourself from living. Each sentence was a mirror I didn't want to look into. She wrote about how the distance had changed her, how she'd grown tired of waiting for a man who loved through silence and hid behind reason. I kept hoping you'd say something. Anything. That you'd admit what we both felt that night in the gallery. But you didn't. And I can't keep orbiting someone who won't look back. I stopped reading there for a long time. The words blurred. My breath felt too loud in the room. She was right. I had been looking away, pretending distance was discipline when, in truth, it was fear. I read on. You once told me love in literature is always tragic. Maybe you were right. But at least in stories, someone always confesses before the last page. When I reached the end, there was no signature. Just one last line, written faintly, like she wasn't sure she wanted me to see it. You changed how I see love. I hope one day you let yourself feel it too. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have. My chair creaked under the weight of everything I hadn't said. The city outside was waking up, car doors slamming, distant footsteps, life moving on, while I sat in the stillness she left behind. I wanted to call her. To tell her she was wrong, that I had felt everything, that I'd just been too careful, too afraid. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because what right did I have to reach for her now, when every chance to be honest had already passed? So instead I wrote back. Not to win her back, but to let the silence finally breathe. You were right, I wrote. I hid behind my restraint and called it wisdom. I mistook fear for virtue. But you made me feel alive again. Thank you for that. I didn't know if she'd ever read it. I just placed it between the pages of the book she first borrowed, Rilke, and left it with the doorman of her old apartment. Sometimes, when I walk past that building, I still wonder if she ever found it. Or if it's still there, waiting quietly, like the both of us once did. Years passed before I saw her again. By then, life had settled into its usual rhythm, lectures, quiet evenings, a house that always felt a size too big for one person. I had learned to live with silence, even to mistake it for peace. But every now and then, when I passed a gallery or caught the faint scent of rain on canvas, I'd think of her, and that unfinished conversation that time had taken from us. It was a Sunday afternoon when it happened. I was by the coast, a small cafe overlooking the sea. The kind of place that never changes, chipped cups, lazy music, and the smell of salt and coffee mixed together. I sat by the window, reading out of habit more than interest, when I heard laughter, low, familiar, unguarded. I looked up. She was standing at the counter, older now, but still somehow radiant in that same quiet way. Her hair was shorter, her movements more assured. She carried herself differently, like someone who had finally learned to breathe freely. For a moment I just watched her. I wanted to memorize her again, in this new light, untouched by the shadows of who we once were. When she turned and saw me, the world stilled, just for a heartbeat. Her eyes widened in recognition, then softened into a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. No surprise. No awkwardness. Just warmth. "It's been a while," she said, walking over to my table. "Too long," I replied, rising instinctively. We didn't speak of the past, not directly. We talked about her work, her travels, her new exhibition in the city. She told me she teaches art now. I smiled at that. Of course she does. The same girl who once read poetry in my office, who painted solitude into color, now guiding others to do the same. "I saw your letter," she said after a pause. "I never answered because I didn't know how to." I nodded. "You didn't need to." The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was soft, full of understanding, even gratitude. We'd both grown into the versions of ourselves we couldn't have been back then. "You once told me love in stories is always tragic," she said with a faint smile. "Do you still believe that?" "No," I said. "Not tragic. Just unfinished." Her eyes glimmered, and for a fleeting second, it felt like time folded, like the man under the streetlight and the girl with rain in her hair still existed somewhere, untouched by years. When she stood to leave, she placed her hand over mine, not lingering, just enough for me to feel the quiet tremor of something remembered. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "You too," I said. And just like that, she was gone again, but this time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like closure. I sat there long after she'd left, watching the sea drift and change, realizing that some people don't stay to complete our story. They appear to remind us that we're still capable of one. She was my student's roommate, I thought, smiling to myself. And for a moment, she was everything. If this story stayed with you, even for a moment, let me know where you're watching from. Globe showing Europe, Africa, and if you believe some connections are meant to shape us, not stay with us, tell me what this one meant to you in the comments. Speech Balloon, don't forget to subscribe for more slow burn stories like this, told from the heart, one quiet breath at a time.